I'd like to just share with those who may be here for the first time that our family went to West Africa. We lived in Liberia 6 years, Ghana 5 years, Sierra Leone a year and a half. And it was when we were in Sierra Leone that my daughter was bitten by an animal that had rabies. And she became very ill because she was allergic to the vaccine that was originally given. So they ordered duck embryo that was actually turned out to be contaminated. And so she became very ill. And eventually, after 10 months and a coup, where the soldiers took over, and I was teaching at a government school where the principal came in, the headmaster we call it, and said, you know, the government's just taken over. This was our second time now. And if teachers leave the room, their rooms during the teaching time, they will be shot. Because the civil servants and the teachers were joining together against the coup that was then taking place. My daughter was very ill, and the hospital doctor recommended that I leave the country because medicine was getting more and more scarce. After a few days, then my daughter, it was determined that she would not get well and that my whole family would have to return to the United States. And I then took her to the hospital that was recommended by our church, and it was there where I was working. And the church helped me to get her into that hospital, and it turned out the owner and managers were friends of my mother's family, so that kind of worked out really well. And they helped me. And then, as you know, my husband then was killed in a car accident 2 months later, and when we were going to my brother's wedding in Detroit. And so now my husband has lost his life. I have a daughter in the hospital. I have 2 other children, ages 10 and 13, and I again turned to the church to ask what I should do. And they said that I was not eligible for assistance because I was employable. I had a bachelor's degree and I was employable. Okay, that's fine. So then I tried to find a job, and everyone said, oh, you're too overqualified. So I took a job as a secretary in the grounds department at the hospital. And that's fine. That's what I did to work my way through college. Worked on the grounds, and so that's fine, except now I'm 35 years old, and I have a girl in the hospital and 2 other children. And so I started looking for work, and I actually was offered a job teaching. And then some insurance money came, and I stopped and went to school. And as I went to Ohio State University, I was really excited because I had 1 quarter left to finish. My daughter was still in the hospital, but she was getting better, and I was going to be finishing my master's in English at Ohio State. 1 quarter left. So I called the Pacific Union because I'm from California, and I said I was graduating with a master's in English and would like to return home to California and would like a teaching job. And the person that spoke to me said that we will never hire an English teacher for our academies who graduates from a public university. I was like, okay. And so I didn't know what to do. I went to see the vice provost, who at that time was an Adventist. And Dr. Hale told me, he says, just study. Study what you want. Get your degree. Don't worry about a job. God will give you that job when you need it. Well, about 2 months to finishing my master's, my daughter's situation changed. And they had decided that she would be a problem to me, and they did not want me to have this problem, and they wanted to put her away, basically, and do some treatments that would allow her to just be put away. And I'm a mother. I couldn't do it. And Friday night, you know that I went and took her against medical advice and ran away to the woods, where I lived in the woods for 4 months. And I am not totally ignorant. And so before I went to the woods, I went to Washington, D.C., talked to them about this self-supporting program. And of course, they were very happy because the first year in the hospital was $125,000. And I was taking her now to a wilderness support program that was, survival program that was really only $5,000 a month. So they agreed to pay for the first 6 months, and if it worked, they would pay the second 6 months. Otherwise, I was in California and could, become part of the California system. And so after 4 months, you know that I had to leave the woods, if you listened on Friday evening, because of an accident that happened to her. And I had to stay in California because of the circumstances. So I put her in the hospital, knowing that the church had said if it worked, they would pay the next 6 months. If it didn't, they would pay the hospital until I was established. So she's in the hospital, and the business manager calls me and tells me, they said they're not paying. So I had to sell my house in Ohio and pay the medical bills. And so I lost my investments. Sorry. And then I said, well, there should be some assistance for my move from Ohio to California, because I'm returning from West Africa and I need to be able to be returned to my home. And the treasurer who spoke to me told me, actually, he says, I know that what's happening to you is not right. I can't do anything about it. But if you have receipts, I can give this money back to you. And I had kept every receipt and every day and everything. I had all this, everything ready. And they actually sent me a check for $20,000 and asked me to sign a statement that I would never ask the church for another penny. Basically, that's the message. So I signed. Now, I finished my degree at San Diego State, but they wouldn't accept Andrew's credits mixed with Ohio's credits, so I had to start over again. And I went to school for 2 years in San Diego. And true to what Dr. Hale had told me, when I finished, I had 5 job offers, some unsolicited, for Linwood Academy, Orangewood Academy, Hawaiian Academy, Broadview Academy. I was like, well, I guess I did get some job offers. Even San Diego, where I had been going to school, I was subbing at the school, and they asked me to stay. So, you know, I did get that job that I needed. But as I finished at San Diego State, I was taking an exit interview that you do by computer. And it says to type in your values. Type in what it is that you want out of your life. So I'm sitting there, you know, filling it out. And it says hospital manager or administrator, short-term care administrator, nursing home administrator. And I was like, okay, why is this? And then the message came out and it said you can add 1. So I put English teacher. In fact, I think I just put English. And it says it doesn't make enough money for your values. And guess what? That was right, too. But anyway, so I investigated working in hospitals, and I even was offered a job to be the administrator in training for a short-term care. But I realized it's not who I am. I'm a teacher. I love the classroom. I love the students. I like the interaction. And so I called the I called the church headquarters, and I asked them if I would be entitled to my husband's retirement, since I was not entitled to any assistance for myself at that time because I was employable. What about retirement? Because I thought, you know, you can work for the church and you will be trusted but not necessarily respected. You can work outside and you will be respected but not necessarily trusted. So I'm trying to decide, what should I do, and will I get enough money to live on? So they assured me that if I worked for the church, I could add my husband's years to my years. So I said, okay, that'll work. And so I decided to go ahead and take the teaching positions, one of them that had been offered to me. And then I can tell you that in the year 2000, I had 35 years, adding my husband's years and my years. And that's the year the church headquarters changed the retirement plan. But I had 35 and a half years in. 18 of mine, 17 and a half of his. And when I called, they told me that I had worked 6 months longer than he had worked, so I was no longer eligible for his. And that I couldn't add his to mine, and that I would have to begin essentially in 1982 as if I were 20 instead of 40. And that's what I've done. So now I have 22 years in, but I've actually worked since 1963 for the denomination. And so I was trying to figure out, what does all this mean to me? And I can tell you that the church is still my family. But the church was my family. And I trusted and respected the church. But I began to discover that when you're no longer the wife of a conference president with 3 healthy children, you know, the 2 cars, 2 kids, dog everything in the yard, that it's different. It's very different. And that was something I wasn't aware of. I don't think I understood how single people might feel in the church, how single moms, single dads, how, families that are not the normal, quote, family, how they would feel. And even when I got the job at this academy, the one I took, and I haven't given the names because I took this job, a board member called me, and she said, "Oh, we're so happy you're coming, and there's a house across kitty corner from mine. It's a beautiful, lovely home, and we would just love to show it to you. And what does your husband do?" And I said, "Well, my husband passed away." "Oh, well, then maybe this is not where you'd like to live." And she hung up. And it's very interesting. And this is something I may not be able to explain, but single men get invited home to homes and families, but single women don't. And that was something I didn't know. And there's just a lot of things that were really kind of shocking to me. And I sort of started something that's not exactly something I'm proud of, but I will share it with you, and I'm going to probably read a little bit of it. I said, the administrators of the church headquarters may have meant well, but to me, they became naysayers. They became like the Israelite spies who said, this isn't going to work. They were mockers like Sanballat and Tobiah, who made life really difficult for Nehemiah. If you don't know, read Nehemiah chapter 2. And they were schemers to try to see how they could make sure I didn't get money, and they were deceivers. I said, they're plotters, they're traitors. Sometimes I even felt like they were bullies. And I thought, Jeanette, what is wrong with you? You've never been like this. It's just not it's not who I am. And it really began to bother me that I was feeling this way. But as Brother Butcher mentioned, I do travel a lot. And I walked into an airport bookstore, and I found this book, How to Relate to Impossible People. I said, I'm buying that book. And when I bought this book, I actually had, and I chose to do it. You sign a commitment that you will spend 31 days with this book. And the importance of that commitment is you might stop halfway through if you didn't. And so, I really did it. And believe it or not, here it is. Here are the people that are negative. Every time you want to do something, they're against it. Here's the whiner. Here's this, here's that. They're all here. The dictator, all these different people. And I thought, yes, here's the bully. Here are these people. And it has scriptures. Every one has a scripture reference. And I began to understand, okay, that's why these people are like that, okay? And then the book surprises you, and it stops. And it says something to the effect that I might be the difficult person that other people can't get along with, that I might be the impossible person. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then you have to read the next lessons that talk about you and talk about the importance. The very first one is forgive. Forgive. It says, forgive and set free. It's like, how can I forgive? How can I do this? And I began to study more, and I'm going to share with you that, I love the Bible, and I believe that I'm a Bible scholar, but I never realized until I read this book that the disciples never asked for faith. They never asked the Lord to give them greater faith, except once. And the one time that they asked for faith, for greater faith, was when Jesus told them they have to forgive. And, you'd have to read it. I think I wrote it. I actually quoted the piece. According to the Christian writer Dick Purnell, only once did the disciples ask Jesus for greater faith. Peter had asked Christ to allow him to walk on the water with him, but he did not ask for faith. The disciples did not ask for greater faith when he miraculously healed people, when he taught them to trust, when he taught them to love God above all else. And the only time they asked Jesus for greater faith is recorded here in Luke 17, verses 1 to 10. Jesus had just warned the disciples that they needed to care for each other. He cautioned them to remember that when someone does wrong to them, that it would be best to talk to the person. If someone asked to be forgiven, forgive. If they did something wrong, accept that they had done wrong. And if you do wrong, you accept that you did wrong. And he went on to advise that after continued wrongs, they were to continue and to forgive. And it was at that point that the disciples asked for greater faith. And so I had made a commitment, so I kept reading. And I read through this book, and I really recommend it to anyone who is struggling with thinking that other people have given them a rough time. I also would like to share with you something that has helped me a lot through these rough times and when people seem not to understand or it's tough for me. And that is that I'm probably a lot older than most people here, but Eric B. Hare used to visit Pacific Union College and do chapels. And I'll never forget a chapel where he was the speaker, the first time I ever heard him. And he walked out and he said, I want you to know there are 12 tribes in Israel. There are still 12 tribes in Israel. 3 or 4 get along, the rest don't. I'm here to speak to those who belong to my tribe, and if you don't belong to my tribe, the next speaker might. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And so even when I was an academy principal, the art class made kites, and each kite represented one of the children of Israel, and they put down the characteristics of that, and we put it in the stairwell so that we would remember that all of us represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And some of us just don't get along as well with one as we do with the other. And so it's something that we need to learn. We need to learn to forgive. And I believe that God has forgiven us. And if he has forgiven us, even though we come many times and ask, we need to also forgive others. And we don't always know where the other person's coming from. We don't have to, because we just need to forgive and forget. And forget. And I can tell you that it's really hard when there's fear. When you're afraid because of a tragedy, when you're afraid because you've been left standing alone, when you're afraid because your child is ill, that's a really rough time. And there's a French author, Camus is his name, and he wrote a definition of fear. His books are based on fear. I'm not recommending his books, but he says that fear, he defines fear as that vague moment in a feverish process when the slightest touch makes us quiver just before a cascade of light opens eternity. And I had to think about his definition of fear. And probably the best example I can give is that I'm an English teacher. And to get my doctorate, I had to take about 5 different doctoral statistics classes. And the first statistics class that I took was from a wonderful gentleman, 84 years old, Dr. Fucher. And he was very kind, and he was very loving. But he was one of those people that saved paper and saved everything, carefully. And so he had told us exactly what was going to be on the test. I studied the stats. I studied. And he told us he would give us the chart that was in our book. So that chart, I could have reproduced it in my sleep because I memorized it. The day of the test, he gave us a piece of paper on which he had done a previous chart from a different book that was now horizontal instead of vertical, and it was totally different. And I was looking at it, and I was so scared. He walked up and touched my shoulder, and I screamed right in the class. And I began to understand, when you have fear, you're porous. You can't think. And so we have to forgive. We have to, for our own goods, because God then can speak to us. Unless our mind is clear and open, I don't know how God can speak to us. But I do know that he still does. And probably the best the best story in the Bible for me at this point to share with you as the story for this evening is the man by the Pool of Bethesda. Because sometimes we just need God to say, do you want to be well? And he makes you well. Because we can't even answer. We're fearful. And before I go into his story, though, I want to tell you that I'm from California, and there are a lot of bag ladies. I don't know if you know what I mean, but they carry bags, and they do. And sometimes I look like a bag lady at Andrews with all my stuff. And I think about those ladies who have chosen to curl up in a box and stay on the sidewalk. And I can't tell you all the tragedies that I've been through that I haven't curled up on the sidewalk and cried. I have. But I have decided to take that first uncertain step away from that sidewalk instead of curling up in that box and staying there. And the man by the Pool of Bethesda curled up and stayed by the pool for 38 years. And let me just share his story. It's in John chapter 5, for those of you who you have your Bibles. I don't really need my Bible to tell you the story, but you remember he was ill for 38 years. And Jesus came up to him and asked him, do you want to get well again? And the man didn't understand the question. Now, if someone had asked, do you want your daughter to be well? I would say yes. If you had the flu and someone said, do you want to get well? You would say yes. But the man by the Pool of Bethesda had curled up and stayed at the pool. That was his security. That was his home. And he didn't understand. And he didn't even say yes. But Jesus was really asking him, do you want to make sweeping changes in your life? Do you want to go from chronic illness to total health? And it would be a big change. And you know, Jesus decided, as we know, to just heal the man. Now, I used to be a part of Adventist student personnel who worked with deans and counselors, and there was an anonymous article about the cost of change. And it used the idea of John 5 and the man by the Pool of Bethesda. So I've made it my own. I've changed it, but the idea really came from that publication. And what I'd like to share with you is something that I went through, but this article was excellent, and I will share different parts with you. So here's the man by the Pool of Bethesda. Here I am. The church has been my family. It's my security. But basically, I didn't get a good reception, a welcome reception in my church headquarters, in the family homes. I could have made a choice to just leave. Take hospital administration, work somewhere else, and never be a part of this church again. But I believe that God forgives me, and he allowed me to come across this book to forgive others. But it means change. And I would challenge you to consider the change that you may need to make in your life. And so the first costly change to the man by the Pool of Bethesda was his identity. I mean, that's where he was comfortable. That's where he was known. And sometimes we can get comfortable in our tragedy. I'm the widow who has a child who's sick, and you can apply for welfare and social services and all of those things, and that's your identity. But he couldn't do that. He was well. Second, he had to give up the form of security because people brought food there, I'm sure. He knew the healing process. He knew that it was unfair that he was sick, and it was unfair circumstances, but he felt secure there. On the third level, this man had to move into a situation that he knew little about. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but for 38 years, you're at a pool with a lot of sick people who receive food. Somebody doesn't lift you to the pool, or they do, but you keep hoping, and you're just there, and that's your identity, and that's your situation, and you're very comfortable, but all of a sudden, you can't be at the pool anymore. You're well. You're well. And you're going to have to leave and enter a world that may be very fearful to you, because it was fearful to me. I can go to Africa and speak the language and go shopping and go to the market and ride the wooden lorries, and I'm comfortable. But America, it was scary to come back. It was more difficult to return here than it was ever to go there. And so you have to remember that God has a plan, and you have to read the Bible again and again. And so as I started reading, I realized that Moses forgot God's promises. He was fearful of leading the children of Israel. And God had to remind him, I will be with you. You can't be fearful. And he went. He was fearful, but he went. And God's promises were fulfilled. And so you may have to leave that world that has been comfortable for you when a tragedy strikes. The fourth area of change for the man by the pool was when he actually risked discovering who he was. I was a pastor's wife. I'm known in West Africa as Pastor Bryson's wife. But who am I? Who am I really? Am I an English teacher? And I have learned to ask even my adult Sabbath school from time to time. I'll ask them, who are you? I'm not a teacher. I'm a daughter of Abraham. I'm a child of God. We are not these titles that people give us. But still, I had to struggle. Who am I? I've been a delegate to GC. I've been, to conferences and all these things. Who am I now? What was going to change? What was going to be my role? And I'm sure the man by the Pool of Bethesda wondered that. How could he even return to the pool? Because the people would accuse him of being false, of fake, of, you just made up all this. His family at home was like, well, who are you? It's a very different situation. And I even had situations with my family. Actually, their family, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, is like I was their ex-daughter-in-law. And I said, no, Mother, I'm still your daughter. I'm still your daughter-in-law. And it was difficult. It was difficult because whenever they saw me, it reminded them of their son and the phone call that came that night that he had passed away. And so as you begin to struggle within yourself, other people don't know what to say to you. They also don't know because it's very internal. You think change is external. It's very intrinsic. It comes from within. And all of us are changing. And the fifth confrontation with this man, the change from the man by the pool, was he faced rejection. There would be skepticism about his healing, about his training. And I hesitate to say too much about this, but the skepticism that existed out there was, what lesson was God trying to teach you? It's very hurtful. What lesson was God trying to teach me? I don't believe in a God who kills my husband to teach me a lesson. There's no way. And so instead of celebrating those of us who lived, you find yourself questioning why you are the survivor. And this man by the Pool of Bethesda also would have skepticism toward him. And he could easily be caught between the two worlds. And I could easily be caught and still sometimes find myself more African than American, and then too American to be African. And it's really difficult. And I hope that as you can see this story of the man by the Pool of Bethesda, reread it and re-examine your own life and ask yourself, who am I? Who am I? You're not your job. You're a daughter, you're a son of Abraham. And you need to ask not only who you are, but you have to ask yourself, where do I go today? What does God have in mind for me today? Live in the present. That was something really hard for me too. Well, in Africa we did this, and you have to live in the present. And that was something I had to learn. And the man from the Pool of Bethesda had to live in the present as well. And I had to decide where to go and what to do. And I'm really thankful that I had loving friends who didn't call and lecture. I had loving friends who would call and read the Bible. I would have African leaders who would come to the U.S. for meetings, and they would call me and find me and just want to know if I'm okay. And the people from West Africa were very, very much a part of my life. And my late husband had gone to school in India for a year, and we had belonged to the Southern Asia group at Andrews, and they also became very much interested and called me and checked on me. And so as I began to realize that it's not my place to say, this person's a naysayer, this person did this, I went to that church and they weren't friendly. I don't think people invited me home because I'm a single woman. No, you can't do that. I found out that it eats you alive. You have to decide, okay, if I went to church today and that was not a friendly church, probably I didn't say hello. I don't smile very easily. And people always tell me, please smile. But I don't know why. I just have a serious look. Maybe I didn't smile. Maybe I walk too fast. And so people think I'm in a hurry, so they won't stop me. I've had to learn, walk slower, take time, smile. It's not them. We see people, unfortunately, how we are, not how they are. You have to think about that. We tend to see through our own eyes, and we see how we are. So if we're sad, if we're withdrawing, that's how we see the people around us. I don't think there is a church in the world that is not friendly. Really. If you walk in and you say hello and you smile and reach out, there's going to be someone. There has to be someone. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I see some people looking at each other. but I just think to be loving and kind is a choice. And, I had to decide that maybe I was the difficult person for the church. Maybe they just really didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know what to do for me. A man from India the year before I came back had been shot by a robber, actually. And the bullet had punctured his lung, and he was on a breathing machine. So when the church said that they weren't going to help pay for my daughter's expenses anymore in just the second year, I said, well, what about this man who's been on a lung machine for 3 years? Did you decide he doesn't need to breathe anymore, so they took him off the lung machine? I mean, I was really unpleasant, okay? So I realized that I was being difficult as well, and I had to accept that. And it wasn't easy. It's not easy to let go. And I know people ask me, well, who was the doctor in the woods on Friday night? He's a dear friend. And so you just have to learn that God doesn't want us to hold those things. We have to forgive. If we want to be forgiven. And the text I'd like to share with you is actually in 1 Corinthians. I have it written down here. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. And it's a challenge. And that verse in the English Standard Version says, be imitators of God. The King James says, be followers of God. But it's a challenge to be an imitator of God. Do we have the faith to imitate God? And I had to stop looking at church leaders. I had to look at myself. And even the pastor I have now, I went to see him because I was having some situations at the university where I'm helping students, and people don't always appreciate when I walk up to their counter and ask them for something unusual. Whenever they see me, they know it's something unusual. And so I was talking to my pastor, and I said, I don't know what to do. And he looked at me and he said, God only had 66% approval rating. He says, you're just trying to please everyone, and even God couldn't do that. So think about that sometimes when things aren't going how you'd like them to go. And so I had to acknowledge that what I needed was peace of mind, take one step each day, live in the present, forgive those. Don't think someone got up in the morning planning to make your day hard. They didn't. And smile. And accept that God loves you. It's so important. And our pastor preached a sermon a couple of weeks ago, and I know some of you have heard the illustration, but he ended with a teacher was asking her students, or his students, to draw a picture that would depict peace of mind. What is peace? And so some of the children drew pictures of a mother holding a child, and some drew a picture of a calm lake, different kinds of things. And then one student drew a rock. And then he went on to explain the rock was in the ocean. Well, I grew up in Northern California going out to Bodego Bay to collect abalone shells and all that, so I know what those rocks look like. And the waves are pushing up against the rocks, and there's an eagle sitting on the rock, perfectly calm in spite of the storm. And so it's my prayer that each of us will have the peace of mind so that we can sit on the rock of Jesus and have that peace. And the last story is from Luke. And sorry. And the story in Luke that I want to share with you is the story of the woman with the hunchback. And you know, again, I don't need this, but this, read your Bible, read the stories. There's so much encouragement here. But remember, there was a woman, and we know that it was they have a name for it now called hunchback, but you know, she was bent over, and everywhere she went, she was just bent over, looking down, and people rejected her. People did not welcome her. And the reason we know is just the culture of the day did not accept people that were like that. This was a punishment from God. And she was bent over double, and she could only look down at the ground. And what we know is that she came into the synagogue not to see Jesus, but to hear him. Not to be healed, but to be near him. And this woman with the hunchback for 18 years entered the synagogue to be near Jesus. And Jesus saw her. And he said, "Daughter, you are free." Brothers and sisters, you are sons and daughters of God. You are free. It's our choice. We are free. We just need to make the choice to allow God to hold us and to see us and to give us the peace that he promised. It's not something we do ourselves. So just know, sons, you are free. Daughters, you are free. God loves you. Thank you.